It's an honor to introduce to you my esteemed colleague, Dr. M. Shawn Copeland, professor of systematic theology in Boston College's Department of Theology. Dr. Copeland earned her doctorate here from BC, and prior to coming back in 2003 as a faculty member, she taught at Marquette University, Yale University Divinity School, and St. Norbert College. She has also held visiting positions at Harvard University Divinity School. At Boston College, Dr. Copeland has a variety of teaching responsibilities. She teaches graduate students preparing for the doctorate in theology, and also teaches undergraduate students who are in the interdisciplinary program in African and African diaspora studies, in the Faith, Peace, and Justice program, and also those in the Pulse program for service learning. Her contributions outside of teaching are also very compelling. Dr. Copeland was the first African American and the first African American woman to serve as president of the Catholic Theological Society of America. In addition, she is a former convener of the Black Catholic Theological Symposium, an interdisciplinary association of Black Catholic scholars recognized as one of the most important influences in North America for drawing attention to issues surrounding African American Catholics. An award-winning writer, Dr. Copeland is the author and/or editor of 6 books, including Enfleshing Freedom, Body, Race, and Being, as well as The Subversive Power of Love, to name 2 of her works. She's also author of 125 articles, book chapters, reviews, and blog entries on spirituality, theological anthropology, political theology, social suffering, gender, and race. Dr. Copeland is the recipient of 5 honorary degrees and was honored with the Seton Medal and the Congar Award for Excellence in Theology. This last November, the University of Dayton presented her with the prestigious Marianist Award, given to a Catholic scholar, author, and theologian who has made an outstanding contribution to the intellectual life. In preaching a Palm Sunday homily for Catholic Women Preach in 2017, Dr. Copeland proclaimed the following, and I quote, "We stand beside and with our God, who loves us and suffers with us, beside us and for us. But we can stand with our God only insofar as we stand beside and wait in active and compassionate solidarity with children, women, and men who suffer concretely, unbeautifully, and actually in our world, which is God's world. That is, with the poor, oppressed, and excluded, abused children, battered women, and homeless men, those who believe differently, and those who are afraid to believe," end quote. Would you write my next homily for me, please? It gives me great pleasure tonight to present to you an extraordinary teacher, scholar, and leader, as well as a person of deep faith, compassion, and unwavering commitment to justice. Please welcome Dr. Shawn Copeland.
I want to thank the School of Theology and Ministry for organizing this event, and I'm very grateful to Melinda Donovan for all the practical details. I am very grateful to all of you for coming out on such a gloomy, rainy night and taking shelter with coffee and tea in the back there. You know. As we all know, today marks the 50th anniversary of the assassination of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Standing on a balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee, talking with colleagues and friends, King was shot at 6:05 p.m. on Thursday, April 4th, 1968, and was later pronounced dead at 7:05 p.m. at an area hospital. Throughout the nearly 13 years of his public Christian social ministry, King so attuned himself to the Word of God as to recover and to exercise the biblical vocation of prophecy for his country, our country, indeed for the world. Like the prophets of old, he was a watchman, scrutinizing the signs of the times in order to witness to and to speak God's justice and providence in an oppressive and anguished world. As a Christian, as an ordained minister, as a theologian, King was motivated by, quote, the conviction that all human beings are made in the image of God and that they are souls of infinite metaphysical value. If we accept this as a profound moral fact, he continued, we cannot be content to see them hungry, to see them victimized with ill health, when we have the means to help them, close quote. King raised his voice to denounce injustice and put his body on the line in disciplined, non-violent civil disobedience. He responded to the demand of conscience to proclaim a new social vision grounded in faith in God to uphold the goodness of all humanity and to affirm the spiritual, cultural, and social potential of the United States. To this end, he challenged us all to respond to urgent problems of racism, poverty and extreme militarism, materialism, war, and violence. The title of the lecture, The Fierce Urgency of Now, is taken from the final paragraph of King's Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community. So this is really what I'm working off of tonight, almost exclusively, and I see that some of you have handouts of some of the quotations taken from this book, as well as a few other places. Nearly all of them will be included in the lecture. In this work, King thinks and strategizes as a practical political theologian. He analyzes the egregious material, cultural, and spiritual conditions of the marginalized and excluded, indigenous people, black people, people of color around the world, and poor white people, children, women, and men of every racial, ethnic, cultural group and religion. In this work, he explains black frustration and anger at grudging white liberal resistance to change in the status quo. He interrogates questions of black identity, class status, and responsibility, importunes our government to give immediate attention to housing, education, employment, and poverty, and urges all Americans to develop a world, or as we would say, global perspective. How, King asks, are we to change these death-dealing conditions? Love. Love is the key, he writes, that unlocks the door which leads to ultimate reality. To unlock that door of that transcendent possibility to be made eminent in our common human living, we as individual women and men must undergo religious, intellectual, and moral transformation. For only as transformed, loving persons, responding in love to the command to love the neighbor, shall we be able to transform our crass and tattered national mores, our racist and exploitative social structures, our acquisitive materialism, our cruel and vindictive political and economic policies, decisions, and actions. King's practical political theology teaches and calls for a praxis of love and solidarity in concrete action and hope in the here and now in order to realize justice, to bring about beloved community. Like so many other prophets, priests, and preachers, like us, Martin Luther King Jr. was a wounded and flawed human being. The poet John Dickson reminds us, quote, "King was never perfect in wisdom, nor ever pretended to be. He was never perfect in conduct, nor free from temptations, nor ever pretended to be. But holiness," Dickson writes, "is not perfection. It is transparency to the grace of God," close quote. Martin Luther King Jr. lived a life in response to God's grace, a life of committed empathy with all who are oppressed in response to the divine dissatisfaction with all forms of injustice. King's example, his commitment, holds the power to teach us about our various roles and tasks in responding to problems of racism, poverty, rampant materialism, violence, and war, in struggling to bring about justice. In the remainder of the lecture, I want to explore King's thinking about those three issues. And I want to draw out some lessons for us as we confront the very same problems 50 years later, the very same problems today. Let's begin with racism. The concept and experience of racism are highly charged and difficult to negotiate. Most often, we reduce racism to individual acts of malice or hatred carried out by a single bad or rogue individual. Because of this, the judgment that racism is a manifestation of social sin remains difficult to comprehend. Certainly, negotiating individual or personal experiences of racism are depleting, demoralizing, and dehumanizing. Our social institutions or structures encode racism subtly and overtly as these mirror the collective values, misunderstandings, preemptive judgments, and decisions of our social order. Such structures sinfully impede the very existence, the life and flourishing of others simply because they are Native American or African or Asian or Mexican or Latinx or of mixed racial ethnic descent. Perhaps no lone individual can be singled out as blameworthy, but all members of our society, all of us, are complicit in the discriminatory and demeaning consequences that some children, women, and men are forced continually to endure. King writes, "Racism is a philosophy based on contempt for life. It is the arrogant assertion that one race is the center of value and object of devotion before which other races must kneel in submission. It is the absurd dogma that one race is responsible for all the progress of history and alone can assure the progress of the future," close quote. This concern of his, writing about racism, also demonstrates that he finds in racism cognitive, affective, and social dimensions. Racism involves acquired affective or emotional reactions, acquired cognitive misapprehensions and misunderstandings, and it is embedded in our social patterns. In other words, racism is learned. It's learned misinformation, learned baseless fear and anxiety. It is learned irrational responses and behavior. It is learned. The roots of racism, King argued, quote, "are deep in America. Historically, it is so acceptable in the national life that today it still only lightly burdens the conscience." In a speech delivered in August 1967, entitled "Which Way Its Soul Shall Go," he stated, "I am sorry to have to say that the vast majority of white Americans are racists, either consciously or unconsciously." With this critique, King alerts us to the notion of unconscious racism. Unconscious racism refers to our complicity in and with what political philosopher Iris Marion Young identifies as those, quote, unquestioned norms, habits, and symbols embedded in the assumptions underlying our institutional rules and the collective consequences of following those rules. Entrenched as well in our unconscious assumptions and reactions in our ordinary, everyday interactions, in our media and cultural stereotypes, and in the structural features of bureaucratic hierarchies and market mechanisms. In short, the normal processes of everyday life in our well-intentioned liberal society. In this way, racism functions as an ethos, writes Black Catholic moral theologian Brian Massingale, as a pervasive symbol system of meaning, identity, and significance. King knew well and acknowledged repeatedly that, quote, many white people have, through a deep moral compulsion, fought long and hard for racial justice. At the same time, he insisted upon the necessity, quote, to refute the idea that the dominant ideology in our country is freedom and equality, while racism is just an occasional departure from the norm on the part of a few bigoted extremists. White America, he contended, manifests a, quote, schizophrenic personality on the question of race. The nation has been torn between selves, a self in which it proudly professed the great principles of democracy, and a self in which it sadly practiced the antithesis of democracy, close quote. Because of such vacillation, whites have never taken a firm, quote, unified and determined thrust to make justice a reality, close quote, for Black Americans. Hence, Blacks continually are met with white backlash. He writes, the same prejudices, hostilities, and ambivalences, the same search for rationalizations, the same lack of commitment that have always characterized white America on the question of race, close quote. The Christian church did not escape King's indignation. He wrote, no one observing the history of the church in America can deny the shameful fact that it has been an accomplice in structuring racism into the architecture of American society. The church, by and large, sanctioned slavery and surrounded it with a halo of moral respectability. It also cast its mantle of sanctity over the system of segregation, close quote. He acknowledged the involvement of Christians and Jewish religious groups in the struggle for civil rights, but he declared as a whole, the church has been all too negligent. The church, he says, has blessed a status quo that needed to be blasted and reassured a social order that needed to be reformed. So the church must acknowledge its guilt, its weak and vacillating witness, its all too frequent failure to obey the call to servanthood. Today, the judgment of God is upon the church for its failure to be true to its mission. If the church does not recapture its prophetic zeal, it will become an irrelevant social club without moral or spiritual authority. True to the ideals and teachings of Judaism and Christianity, King believed that every human person is heir to a legacy of dignity and worth. Ideals and teaching diametrically opposed to racism. Indeed, for Jews and Christians, racism is idolatry and heresy. For racism seeks to replace the one God with an idol of human making and human visage. King asserted, quote, so long as the Negro or any other member of a minority group is treated as a means to an end, the image of God is abused in him or her, and consequently, proportionately lost by those who inflict the abuse, close quote. Racism damages the person who is abused, and racism damages the person who inflicts the abuse. Every human life, he maintained, is a reflection of divinity, and every act of injustice mars and defaces the image of God in the human person. Thus, racism stands as both personal sin and social disorder, entailing not only individual prejudice, but the exercise of religious, historical, cultural, social power to keep one race privileged and secure to keep one race privileged and secure and other races disempowered and vulnerable. Yet, as King wrote, racism is a tenacious evil, but it is not immutable. Transformation, change in human persons, change in our social order is possible. Poverty. Poverty is the chronic inability to consistently meet basic vital needs, such as food, clothing, shelter, medicines, education, cultural enrichment. Structural poverty is violence. It breeds fear, silence, and suffering in the absence of flourishing, anxiety, powerlessness, and despair in the absence of a future. On a global scale, poverty evinces greed and gross inequality between nations. The poor person, Gustavo Gutierrez writes, is, quote, the product or byproduct of an economic and social system fashioned by a few for their own benefit, close quote. The curse of poverty, King declared, has no justification in our age. The time has come for us to civilize ourselves by the total, direct, and immediate abolition of poverty. On his analysis, the nation's previous attempts to deal with poverty were fragmentary and spasmodic, Band-Aids that did not reach the profoundest needs of the poor, failing whites and blacks alike. He took note of the many psychological and emotional consequences of poverty: conflicts between spouses, conflicts between parents and children, loss of self-esteem, distortion of personality, and crippling anxiety. He held that the dignity of impoverished persons would flourish when they themselves possessed the monetary resources to meet their own needs. We must create full employment, he wrote, or we must create incomes. What he proposed was and remains controversial: a guaranteed income, a consistently progressive, dynamic measure pegged not to the lowest, but to the median income of society, and increasing automatically in relation to the growth of the national total social income. Such a program, King asserted, quote, would benefit all the poor, including the 2/3 of them who are white. And he added, I hope that both blacks and whites will act in coalition to effect this change, because their combined strength will be necessary to overcome the fierce opposition we must realistically anticipate, close quote. In support of this proposal, King cited the opinion of John Kenneth Galbraith, one of the leading economic authorities of the time, who estimated $20 billion a year would effect a guaranteed income. This, Galbraith said, is, quote, not much more than we will spend the next fiscal year to rescue freedom and democracy and religious liberty as these are defined by experts in Vietnam, close quote. Now, neither King nor Galbraith confused guaranteed income with welfare. Neither advocated welfare, but both recognized the profound impact of poverty on human and humane life. There are, of course, several objections to this proposal. Chief among them is that a guaranteed income might discourage work and encourage indolence. Galbraith anticipated this objection, observing, quote, Idleness we do know to be demoralizing. But even here there is a problem, he continued. Why is leisure so uniformly bad for the poor and so uniformly beneficent for the moderately well-to-do? Above all, though, King urged us to confront our cognitive and behavioral distancing from the poor. How readily we dismiss responsibility for these men, women, and children, he asserted, by, quote, branding them as incompetent and inferior. Nor did King shrink from criticizing the then small black middle class. He wrote, "It is time for the Negro haves to join hands with the Negro have-nots, and with compassion journey into that other country of hurt and denial. It is time for the Negro middle class to rise up from its stool of indifference, to retreat from its flight into unreality, and to bring its full resources, its heart, its mind, and its checkbook to the aid of the less fortunate brother. The salvation of the Negro middle class is ultimately dependent upon the salvation of the Negro masses." At the same time, King insisted, quote, "As we work to get rid of the economic strangulation that blacks face as a result of poverty, we must not overlook the fact that millions of Puerto Ricans, Mexican Americans, Indians, and Appalachian whites are also poverty-stricken. Any serious war against poverty must of necessity include them. We must create full employment," he said, "or we must create incomes." In the spirit of the prophet Amos, he concluded, quote, "Our economy must become more person-centered than property and profit-centered. If democracy is to have breadth of meaning, it is necessary to adjust this inequity. It is not only moral, but it is also intelligent. We are wasting and degrading human life by clinging to archaic thinking." King likened poverty on the international scale to, quote, "a monstrous octopus that stretches its choking prehensile tentacles into lands and villages all over the world," close quote. He viewed it to be a moral obligation that wealthy nations provide capital and technical assistance to underdeveloped nations. Indeed, he challenged wealthy nations to initiate a massive sustained Marshall Plan for Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Moreover, such a plan, he argued, quote, "must not be used as a surreptitious means to control the poor nations. Such an approach would lead to a new form of paternalism and a neo-colonialism which no self-respecting nation could accept. Money devoid of genuine empathy is like salt devoid of savor, good for nothing except to be trodden underfoot," close quote. He recognized the ways in which neo-colonialism, racism in its more sophisticated form, sustained corrupt aristocracies that refused to invest in their own countries throughout Africa, Asia, and Latin America. He contextualized the civil rights struggle in the larger world perspective, saying, "Equality with whites will not solve the problems of either whites or blacks if it means equality in a world society stricken by poverty and in a universe doomed to extinction by war." So our third problem, war. King wrestled strenuously with his conscience over taking a public stand regarding the war in Vietnam. Eventually, he decided that as a Nobel laureate, but above all as a Christian and a Christian minister, he was obliged to stand for peace. On April 4th, 1967, speaking at New York's Riverside Church, he presented a rationale for his dissent that was fundamentally theological. He said, "I must be true to my conviction that I share with all men and women the calling to be a son and daughter of the living God. Beyond the calling of race or nation or creed is this vocation of sonship and brotherhood, and because I believe that the Father is deeply concerned, especially for his suffering and helpless and outcast children, I come tonight to speak for them." Close quote. For this act of conscience, King incurred the insults of President Lyndon Johnson, harsh public criticism from black leaders, from white politicians, from ordinary black and white citizens, and from the national press. Many deemed King's leadership on civil rights to be incompatible with public opposition to government foreign policy. In this speech, King urgently, passionately, fiercely protested his country's involvement in the war, calling our attention to gratuitous assaults against civilians, destructions of families and villages, napalm bombings, careless and casual arrogance, racist imperialism. His criticism of the war was rooted in an unyielding belief, quote, that the good news, the gospel of Jesus Christ, was meant for all, for communist and capitalist, for their children and ours, for black and for white, for revolutionary and conservative, close quote. At the same time, King decried our government's cruel manipulation of all those who are impoverished. He said, "We have been repeatedly faced with the cruel irony of watching black and white boys on TV screens as they kill and die together for a nation that has been unable to seat them together in the same schools," close quote. We here tonight would do well to remember that in the 1960s, in many northern cities, these same young black and white men could not live in the same neighborhood. Nor could young black men wearing the uniform of the United States Marine Corps feel safe from physical assault in white southern towns. These young black men were being asked to sacrifice their lives for freedoms in Southeast Asia that they could not enjoy at home in the United States. In the spirit of the prophet Micah, King denounced the war as, quote, filling our nation's homes with orphans and widows, injecting poisonous drugs of hate into veins of people normally humane, of sending men home from dark and bloody battlefields, physically handicapped and psychologically damaged. Such war cannot be reconciled with wisdom, justice, and love. He concluded, a nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. Hearing or reading these words today, we are challenged to contend with our own casual forgetfulness of the young men and women of all racial, ethnic, cultural groups, most of whom are impoverished and or working class, who fight our wars, who risk their physical and mental well-being for what we are told is a more secure and safe homeland. King called for a revolution of values that would rouse us to question, quote, the fairness and justice of many of our present and past policies, to look uneasily on the glaring contrast of poverty and wealth, and with positive action, seek to remove those conditions of poverty, insecurity, and injustice. He urged us to form the vanguard of a global revolution of values. There is nothing except a tragic death wish, he argued, to prevent the United States from reordering our priorities so that the pursuit of peace will take precedence over the pursuit of war. What might we learn? First, in order to resist the recrudescent racism and cultural imperialism that have shaped our daily common human living, we must take race, racial formation, and racism seriously. To take race, racial formation, and racism seriously requires us to reject any reduction of race to a morally irrelevant category and racism to personal prejudice. Taking race, racial formation, and racism seriously demands that we uncover, engage, and educate ourselves about our nation's racialized and racist history of continuing oppressions, brutalities, and exclusions. We have concealed our persistence in social sin beneath self-promoting narratives of manifest destiny, of cultural heritage, of racial and national exceptionalism. Second, we must embody and enact a more profound understanding of human persons as persons, not as statistics, not as problems to be solved or fixed, but as human persons as we are human persons. Certainly in an historical, cultural, and social matrix dominated by racism, poverty, acquisitive materialism, violence, war, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, nativism or hatred and fear of immigrants, misogyny, homophobia, transphobia, authentic openness to human persons who are different from us may be difficult. Yet the risk of encounter and engagement with others remains necessary. Such encounters and engagement bring about change in us, transformation of our minds, our hearts, our behaviors. Our responses to the structural evils that plague our human relationships ought not to be rooted in pride of trumping evil, but in humility, love, and hope. In this way, we acknowledge and witness to the oneness of human creatureliness. In this way, we honor the richness of human diversity as the most basic feature of that oneness, even as we situate human life within the ordered beauty of creation. For, as King insisted, all life is interrelated. We are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied into a single garment of destiny. Whatever afflicts and affects one directly affects all indirectly. We are made to live together because of the interrelated structure of reality. Third, King claimed that the Christian church had a social mission rooted in its prophetic task and fidelity to the preaching of Jesus. For him, the projection of a social gospel was the only true witness of a Christian life in a segregated and oppressive America. If we are the church, and we are, then this is our task, yours and mine. We must protest the debasing and upending of our life together. We must resist any attempt to make structural inequality acceptable, normal, and normative. King recognized that God struggles with us and that along with divine engagement comes a divine solution to oppression and suffering. That divine solution presses us toward a social praxis that neither recklessly nor romantically embraces mere activism, but rather is immersed in, growing from, and consonant with a community of faith. Fourth, King stated that he was not seeking to integrate blacks into the prevailing values of American society. Rather, he urged blacks to be those, quote, creative dissenters who would call the nation to a higher destiny, to a new plateau of compassion, to a more notable expression of humanness, close quote. Today, in 2018, we all must become creative dissenters, no matter our racial, cultural background, no matter our social class standing, no matter our sexual orientation, no matter our religion or faith, no matter our different ableness. We all must become creative dissenters from the prevailing values of the status quo, like the families of Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut, who insist that human life is precious. Like the founders of the Black Lives Matter movement, who insist that human life is precious. Like the Me Too movements, with and without hashtag, who insist that human life is precious. Like the artists who paid tribute to the 9 people murdered in Mother Emanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina, who insist that human life is precious. Like the students of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, who insist that human life is precious. Like students all across the country practicing peaceful confrontation through walkouts, who insist that human life is precious. We must all become creative dissenters. And if we are to be authentic in our creative dissent, we must educate ourselves. King held that, quote, education without social action is a one-sided value because it has no true power potential. Social action without education is a weak expression of pure energy. Deeds uninformed by educated thought can take false directions, close quote. As creative dissenters, we must lead a revolution of values, a revolution against the increased privatization and growth of the prison industrial complex, along with its massive rates of incarceration, particularly among Black and brown youth, men, and women, against the criminalization of poverty, against police brutality, against the crude dismantling of labor unions, against our cruel responses to migrant, refugee, homeless, mentally ill, abused, differently abled, paroled, and released poor white and dark children, women, and men. We must take up authentic responsibility for healing our culture, of planting seeds of truth and justice. Fifth, hope as a practice was key to realization of justice. Hope was never far from Martin Luther King's thoughts, words, and actions. He was a man of hope who believed that through faith and love, a stone of hope could be sculpted from a mountain of despair. He was a man of prophetic Christian realism. For King, hope was never confused with liberal notions of progress or optimism. And while progress and optimism are laudable, neither is rooted in transcendence, which in religious or theological, certainly in Christian terms, depends upon faith. Hope is at once the eschatological and concrete ground of human existence and human action. On the one hand, hope is fixed on God. On the other hand, hope springs from the concreteness of our creatureliness, our existence, our experience, our capacities and abilities for action. Hence, in the framework of a practical political theology, hope is tied ineluctably to authentic social praxis. Thomas Aquinas distinguishes hope as moving or stretching toward a good, as a desire for a good that is difficult, even arduous, yet possible to obtain. Further and importantly, Aquinas writes, quote, the perfection of hope lies not in achieving what it hopes for, but in embracing its standard. Hope then centers us and steadies us in sustained efforts to obtain what we do not yet possess. Hope requires of us an obedience, situational and specific, motivated by love of God and love of neighbor, drawn on by commitment to the good, engaging constants of historical and personal circumstance, necessarily unselfish, unstinting, humble. And what we hope for, what we desire, changes us. At the same time, authentic hope can never be innocent. It astutely grasps the asymmetry of power in the institutional relations between the haves and the have-nots. Power, King wrote, properly understood, is the ability to achieve purpose. There is nothing essentially wrong with power. The problem is that in America, power is unequally distributed, close quote. Let me conclude. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. lived a life of committed empathy with all who are oppressed in response to a divine dissatisfaction with injustice. His life has much to teach us in 2018, yet we have made it difficult for ourselves to learn from him. Why? Ever so cynically, we have canonized Martin Luther King Jr., turned him into a plaster-cast saint, into what Brandon Terry describes as a, quote, mythic figure of consensus and conciliation who sacrificed his life to defeat Jim Crow and placed the United States on a path toward a more perfect union, close quote. We are comfortable with this king, the king who preached exegetically sophisticated, philosophically informed, theologically creative, and well-crafted sermons. The king who spoke eloquently about a dream for his children and his country. The king who blasted the church for ignoring the social mission of the gospel. The king who denounced ministers and priests and rabbis and religious leaders for their reluctance and fear to join in struggles for equality and civil rights. The king who accepted the Nobel Prize. This king we celebrate, we honor, we revere. And this is the very same king whose dream we have trivialized, misinterpreted, and marketed back to ourselves as a dream of simplistic economic inclusion, dismissing sorely needed thoroughgoing change in our political and economic status quo. We are happy, too happy to call this king, quote, a prophet of U.S. progress and redemption, another Moses leading his people. There is another king, one whom I hope I have shared with you this evening, the one we too conveniently overlook, the king who makes us uncomfortable. This is the king who condemned the Vietnam War, the king who sadly indicted his country as, quote, the greatest purveyor of violence in the world, the king who charged that, quote, the life and destiny of Latin America are in the hands of United States corporations. This is the king who offers us no silver-tongued court prophet, this is the king who does not offer us an easy conscience or who performs social miracles upon request. This king's prophetic voice echoes the condemnations of Amos, our complicity in the impoverishment, abuse, disemployment, and trafficking of children, women, and men at home and abroad and around the world. This king's prophetic voice rings with the condemnations of Micah against the militarism we applaud, even as we abandon traumatized veterans. This king's prophetic message disturbs our consciences, calls us to personal, religious, intellectual, and moral change, transformation. This king urges our engagement in institutional change and transformation. This king's voice is fearless, outspoken, and judges the conduct of elected government leaders, lawmakers, and appointed officials. This king's voice judges our conduct as privileged and powerful participants in extending the residual benefits of exploitation, exclusion, misogyny, and racism. Our society's need for change, our personal and individual need for change of mind and heart, behavior and action, not only is necessary but crucial. Yet such change cannot occur unless each of us cultivates within ourselves those moral virtues that promote and further the common human good. Our history as a nation is mired in expropriation of land, greed, genocide, racism, misogyny, economic exploitation, oppression, nativism, and cultural imperialism. We, the living, are not guilty of the historic injustices and crimes against human life, against the various peoples and their cultures that were perpetrated prior to and during the founding of the United States from the 17th through the 20th century. We, the living, are not guilty of these historic injustices, but we must never forget that the brutalities and sins of our past have spawned the troubled future in which we presently live. We are responsible for the present, and thus for the future that our children's children's children shall inherit. We have the responsibility here and now to refuse to continue to act in accordance with or in complicity with the attitudes and dispositions, prejudices and hatreds, racisms and oppressions those brutalities and those sins sustain. Those of us who are the beneficiaries of privileges of race or gender or expropriation or exploitation or cultural imperialism have a special moral and social responsibility to acknowledge those privileges, to recognize their continuities with historical injustices, and to act to change the very structures that have afforded us these privileges. Our racism, acquisitive materialism, violence, and militarism remain urgent problems now. So too does our anti-Semitism, our Islamophobia, our nativism, our disdain for the differently abled, our misogyny, our homophobia, our transphobia. These problems are not generated from somewhere out there. These problems are in us, in our consciousness, in our thinking and feeling, in our acting. These problems allow us to undermine our social and moral connectedness to one another. The achievement of proper conditions for human flourishing forms civil obligations, but not civil obligations merely. Such achievement constitutes part of the fabric of our responsibility to and for one another as human beings. Advocacy and action for justice is our obligation, our responsibility, yours and mine. We too face the fact that tomorrow is today. We too have a choice: love, authentic human relationships, and hope, or hate, violence, and despair. We too confront the fierce urgency of now. And this is our chance, yours and mine, to choose between chaos or community. So where will we go from here? And what will we do? Thank you. Before we start, I just want to thank, thank everyone for coming, and especially our faculty members who are here, especially my colleagues from theology and African and African diaspora studies and the Pulse program. I know everyone is so busy. We're crashing into the end of the semester before we just escaped Easter break, but I know people's time is very valuable, so thank you very much, especially.
Good evening, Dr. Copeland. Thank you so much for what you've shared and taught us today. Just a question in terms of, and I know the answer to this was just woven throughout the entire talk, but just to give a specific example, in terms of a theology that's a social political theology that's informed by what Dr. King was teaching, was espousing, how would, and we're using the word urgent.
Yes.
And there was a press conference today where that word was repeated a couple times, but I want to know how theology responds to the Secretary of Homeland Security, who is saying it is urgent that we deploy today our National Guard on the borders of the country. And not to put this on you.
Full
But I know
disclosure, full disclosure, this is my parish priest.
But theology does speak.
You're out.
Well, I really do think the urgency is about trying, I think, to understand our humanness. And this is the profound lesson. I came to King Studies late. I mean, probably about 10 years ago only. And there are people who've been doing this, for a very long time, maybe 15 years. But the point is, this question is not just a political question. It's a question that has profound, as he says, we all have profound metaphysical value. So this question, chaos or community, has profound metaphysical consequences. Not just in a literal sense of who will be in existence and who will not, but certainly that. The thing I think here is, this is a person, we just were saying, Professor Francine Cardman from the School of Theology and Ministry was just saying to me that it's hard to remember that he was only 39 years old when he was assassinated. And for someone doing what he's doing, he's not teaching in a classroom, but he's teaching on the road. He's teaching in a meeting. He's teaching all the time in preaching. There must be a vision. This is how I interpret him, as really having a vision that's grounded in love and hope and faith. And that love, that agape, which he speaks about so frequently, is really disinterested love. That's love in which I'm committed to the neighbor. I'm not looking for something for myself. And so the urgency of pushing that forward in response to let's get on the border and it's quite paradoxical, isn't it? Every nation has to have borders and boundaries. Well, it has borders and boundaries. I don't know if it has to, but it has them. And every nation has to stand before those borders and boundaries in some way. So the way we treat people in Canada is not the way that we treat people in our southern border. And so the question is why? The question is why? That's the urgency, I think, for us to be able to look at our reality, to explore that reality, to examine it, interrogate it, which is what goes on in this book, an interrogation of reality. It's the situation, and then what's the response? And then when that response, we're into the hermeneutical or pastoral circle, whatever you want to call it. I mean, that's really what's going on here as I read this, I don't know if that's useful or not, but I'll sure hear about it on Sunday, so. Yes. Oh, who's doing this? Okay, I am. So then go ahead. Where's the microphone? Okay, great. All right.
My name is Joe Kavadis. I'm a veteran for peace. And Martin Luther King saved my life. Because I was in Vietnam, I was supposed to stay a year, and I was out of there much sooner because of the protests back in the 60s. We had the Catholics, Dorothy Day, the Berrigan brothers. We had William Sloane Coffin. We had Muhammad Ali. We had all these people out for peace in the 60s. We now have, they even kicked out ROTC from BC in 1971. There was an invasion of Cambodia. All the universities shut down in 1970, and I want to thank everybody who protested the war because I'm alive today because you protested. Now, my question is, what about today? We have a 17-year war in Afghanistan. I'm part of Pax Christi in Boston. 4 members. That's all, 4 people. I've been out for 15 years giving out flyers against this war, and I'm out alone many, many times. Where is the peace movement? And we had 3 popes condemning the war, and we have 3 presidents prolonging it. Where the church is, the bishops in the United States are silent on this. This is what my question is. What happened to the peace movement, and what happened to the Catholic Church, or any of the Christian churches? The only ones, the Jehovah's Witnesses are out there for peace because they don't fight the war, and the Quakers, they're peaceful people. Where are the Christian peace work in this country today? That's my question.
That's a profound and important question. And my only response to that could be, I think we're all captive of upward mobility, huh? We really are. You exactly. That would change things completely. But yes, I think we are really captive of upward mobility, and because the same people are going off to war. People who are desperately in need of both employment and an education. And I don't have any statistics with me right now about this, but I think that's it's a reasonable response to your question. And this question about the peace movement is one that some theologians have been asking from the very beginning. What happened to the peace movement? Where are we? So I'm in sympathy with you, in empathy with you. We all do what we can, and we need to do more. We need to do more. That's the point. Who's got the microphone? Okay.
Hi. Thank you so much for such a beautiful and profound talk. I'm going to take my opportunity to ask you a question that's been bothering me for a long time. And you mentioned the issue of racism being unconscious.
Yes.
But also that Dr. King said that both abusers and the abused are equally affected by racism. So it reminded me of some of Frantz Fanon's writings from The Wretched of the Earth, and talking about how colonialism can become embodied. So if racism and oppression are embodied, did Dr. King talk about how you move it out of your body? And then also, where does forgiveness, not holding on to resentment, come in?
Yeah.
I had a second question. I'll throw it in real quick. You can answer it or not. If we're thinking about figures, leaders, in a more complex way and not canonizing them, how then do we also move to forgiving those who we've perceived as having done egregious wrongs? So, separate question.
Catholics used to like penance. I mean, that was one of the premises of confession, huh? That there was penance of some kind, and not cynical penance. I mean, I didn't bring up the news, but some news blogs have been casting about saying that some people are trying to offer black people reparations as a way to purchase their political franchise. Let's not be duped. Let's be very astute and clear. You can be holy and humble and hopeful without being a fool, and without being bamboozled, huh? That can happen. I think the issue of the embodiment of these things, my point is that we don't even know until we're in a situation where we have some experience of real dissonance. We begin to see how our life in one place is so different than life in another. That the things that you're looking out for while you're in one place are not the things that you're looking out for in another. So to be on the continent of Africa for me is to be invisible. I'm just one more person. I'm not a threat to anybody's restaurant, to anybody's church, to anybody's school. I'm just invisible. I'm like all the other black people who are there. And all the white people who live there are used to all the other black people who live there. We have lived, this is his point, we've lived so with this for more than, well, I guess for nearly 300 years, huh? And we who live in the eastern part of the United States, we keep thinking that this is all about people in the South, and it isn't. It's really also about us. We had slaves in Massachusetts. That's something we should remember. It's not something we like to remember, but it's something very true. That same was true in Rhode Island. So the issue of finding a way to distinguish ourselves we've imbibed it, we've taken it into ourselves, and then we're projecting it outward. Fanon solutions to these things are much more vigorous and also are more willing to be engaged in the potential of violence than Martin Luther King Jr. ever was. And I think that that's really where we are. I think the issues of it's getting our own cognitive dissonance. I mean, that's a beginning. That's a beginning. But being willing to put ourselves in the places where that happens is so difficult. It's so difficult. I don't know. I try to have a lot of hope in young people, in our students. But sometimes it's very disappointing. Sometimes it's very disappointing. So they've already imbibed what we've passed on to them. And it's much easier to take on the negativity, which is so simple and simplistic, than it is to work with the hard facts, to work with the different kinds of experiences one can have. And when it happens that they experience that cognitive dissonance, that's a beautiful thing to see. It's a beautiful thing to be a part of, even a tiny part, just to observe, which is not a total answer to your question. But since this is also somebody from our parish, I guess I'll see you on Sunday too. Okay, let's have somebody from BC or a visitor here.
Thank you for a profound, is a good word, lecture, and I look forward to being able to watch it again when it comes out on the website. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about the Reverend Barber and the Kairos Center Poor People's Campaign that is stepping into action now.
Mm-hmm. That's a very good question, and there are people around here, I think, who've been involved in it very directly. But I think he's trying very hard to awaken us. And to rediscover and recover the prophetic elements of religion. I mean, this is part of what's at stake here. But we too are, in some ways, this is not an excuse, it's an observation. The church has lost in the United States, the Catholic Church at least, that's the only church I can really speak for. Not that I speak for it, but I can speak about it. We've lost a lot of moral and spiritual authority, and we're very chary at trying to claim it. But that's where, in effect, humility might be something to be manifest, because what is wrong is wrong. So I think that this idea of trying to reawaken the prophetic dimensions of religion is very important. And so I think that Barber is really trying to educate us. What I've seen of him is very constructive, I think, and very positive, very engaged, really trying to get us to get hands-on again with one another and with the issues that we are facing.
Hi. I had a question just about just the topic urgency of now. I know after you finished the lecture, I was thinking about our class, and and you have this a good lecture and you learn about these things, and I have the urgency to go talk to people who I know essentially would give me what I want to hear. Like in our class especially, it's you talk about
Mr. Wing is a conscript.
You talk about trouble with the criminal justice system, for instance, and you turn to your members in your class, and they most likely grew up in New England, and they go to BC, so they're going to give you the exact same response. And I think that's kind of, you're letting people know, but it's like they already know. They already hear the message. They already can possibly understand it. I think the question is when you try to approach someone, though, who doesn't, and you try to seek them out, you come off as oh, you just don't know, you're not enlightened. And then if you're lucky, the response will be, I think you should go away, or rather than,
Yeah.
And it's like, how do you approach someone without coming off as that
Yeah.
holier than thou? Because I think that's the most practical thing. It's like you don't need to convince people who already know. You have to convince people who you probably want to hit in the face but.
Well, no, that's a really good point, and it's a really good question, and that's part of our risk of conversation with everyone. Not everyone in our class is nodding yes, yes, yes when we're reading and talking, but in my heart I know that not everyone in our class who's nodding yes, yes, yes really means yes, yes, yes. It's convenient to be nodding at the moment. But we find out, and you will find out, Jonathan, really what people think in some very quiet wee hours of the morning when you're having a real long conversation with someone. And I think the stance is always one of trying to learn, trying to get yourself in the other person's shoes, whoever that person is. And to try to help that person that help yourself, first of all, trying to get into someone else's shoes and to listen that they're but not to be so defensive that I'm right, that I can't hear what are potential objections, and that might really have some vein to contribute, some vein of truth, some bit of fact, some lump of something to contribute. And I think that's the issue of conversation. Everyone is trying to get us all to talk to each other now because we seem to be a polarized nation. And trying to talk to one another quite sincerely is really pretty difficult. Because, in fact, you're right, it's easy to be around like-minded people. But it's not to intentionally find people with whom I disagree. And it's at this point in both your life and career here, and it's always a challenge for us, people who are older, who are sort of set in, we have to be able to learn. And that's why people keep teaching, because they like to be around young people to keep learning. That's a sincere thing, I think, for people who are faculty. At the same time, we also always think we know best. And that's our problem. That's our problem. And sometimes we find out that we don't. So I think the key thing here is real openness and to keep coming back. To keep coming back, to be angry and, be yelled at and yell, but then to go and say, let's go have a coffee. Let's go to this thing, finding things that the other person does that you do, that you can do together. I mean, there has to be some common ground that you're seeking to establish in some way before we start talking about these other heady things, but that are really rooted in us and a part of our lives. The other thing is the risk of correcting our friends when they say things that are just completely, misogynist or racist yes. Sometimes people want to experiment with new words. This is why everybody loves like the vagina monologues. Everybody loves that because everybody wants to say all those words. That's why you do it in college. I know that. If you go once and you're an old person, you've gone enough. But the point for you is that, in fact, you're learning how to talk to other people. And learning how to talk to other people is a continuing exercise because we're all not just different by obvious empirical kinds of things, but we're all different in our religious beliefs that don't always show. We're different in our personal concerns that don't always show, that we don't always talk about. And so getting to those, to be a real friend to someone, that's, I think, where that starts. I know you'll ask me this again in class tomorrow, so okay. Yeah. We're done. That's good.
And our time is up, unfortunately, but thank you again, Dr. Copeland.